Split toning is a very underutilized color grading technique, but it's very, very powerful. In fact, I use it on pretty much every single project, and most professional colorists do in some way or another. The edge that split toning gives you is the ability to create some super unique looks. Even if you're just enhancing LUTs or PowerGrades that you're using, you are able to push that look into a direction that suits your project or is really unique to you. For those of you that don't know what split toning is, here's a really simplified explanation. You should know by now that we can separate our image into 3 tonal regions or luminance zones, being shadows, highlights, and midtones. Split toning basically wants to protect our midtones whilst we push complementary colors or contrasting colors into our shadows and our highlights. So as you push blue into your shadows and warmth into your highlights, you create some visual contrast or color contrast as your shadows cool down and your highlights warm up. The trick here is to protect your midtones so that your skin tones aren't too affected by this color push. So let me show you some split toning methods in DaVinci Resolve. Watch through to the end of the video because there's some really cool tools that I'm going to talk about. Also, I have 3 free cinematic PowerGrades for you to download at the link in the description. They have some split tone built into them already. So if you are wanting to test it out, figure out how to do this, just download those PowerGrades. You can pull it in. The whole node tree will be there with all of these adjustments, and you can go and look at how I did those split tones to really push those looks into a different direction. I'm not going to go too crazy deep into this because I think we can overthink it quite a lot. There are a couple things that I think you should know about if you are going to be doing some type of split toning. There's a link to a video in the description by Cullen Kelly, and he goes through finding middle gray for the color space that you're working in so that when you're applying some kind of split tone, you're not really affecting the exposure levels of your image, which is really, really important. I'm not going to go through that in this video because I'm going to approach this video in more of a creative way. So showing you how to achieve some really cool looks using split toning while still giving you obviously some technical knowledge, because without the technical, we can't really achieve the creative properly. So let's jump into it. The first method that we're going to talk about is split toning using our curves. This is a method that I've used for a very long time, and it's one of the most recommended ways to do split toning. If you don't know where your curves are, it's the first within the tool palette. It's the first tool that you click on. I'm just going to show you the quick anatomy of this. If I were to hold down Alt and then click over here, I'm adding a control point that is anchored to the line that it is centered on. And then if I do the same over here and do the same over here. So now we have our 3 tonal regions, basically. I say basically because it's not exact. Because I'm working in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, this is essentially where my middle gray is, somewhere around here. I'm not being precise, I'm just trying to show you an example here. So this would be a more accurate sort of configuration for my curves for me to be able to make adjustments here and it affect those tonal regions within my image more accurately, because we are in this color space and that is our middle gray. That is a central point where we actually kind of want to be pivoting off of when we're adjusting our shadows and our highlights. So now if I pull down on my shadows, you can see that my skin tones are not being affected as much. If I pull up in the highlights, you can see that my highlights are very specifically being targeted. But we have this control where we can create a little bit of a roll off up here, something like that. It's nice, gentle S-curve. This is just for an example to show you the anatomy of a curve structure. Right now, you can see that this line is white, but we can actually change what color channel are we adding curves to. So we can go red, green, and blue. Y is obviously luminance, and then we can link them all so that we're affecting all of them at the same time. What we're going to do here is create quite a cinematic and cool look in the shadows, and then obviously warm those highlights up. This is all about subtlety, and you're going to hear me say that quite a lot. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm obviously just working on my red channel here. I'm going to make another control point just down here. Pay attention to the parade. I've got the parade open so that we can see red, green, and blue channels within our scope. If you need to understand more about how to read scopes, just check out this video. It will tell you all about it. It's really, really helpful. So we're going to just subtract gently somewhere here. And you can see like how small that adjustment is based off of where we've come from, which is on that white line. But look how huge that change was. So if I reset that, look how massive that changes. And as I pull that down, do you see where everything is getting bunched up here at the bottom? That is because it's all being compressed and it's kind of clipping a little bit. So we want to do this quite subtly. So just something like this, just down there. I'll go full screen before and after. It's a little bit too subtle for me. Can pull down slightly more, somewhere around there, before and after. Let's go too far and then we can bring it back, right? So I'm going to go to green now, because now that I have subtracted the red from the shadows, what I have done is introduce teal, which is quite green. So if that's the look you're going for, go for it. But I'm going to try and cool this down a little bit more, so it's not just teal, it's got some coolness to it, a little bit more blue. Why wouldn't I just go and add blue from the beginning? But that's because if I went and added blue, I'd still have to do some kind of dance. Because if you look at this blue, it's not necessarily what I'm looking for. And I prefer, when doing split toning, to rather subtract than actually add. And that's because they do give you different results. Get it back to where we were. And then in my greens, I'm going to pull down slightly as well. Probably half of what I've done, maybe just more than half. So before and after. Before and after. And you can really see our skin tones are looking pretty good still, because we've actually protected them. But all the shadows are feeling super cool, super blue, and there's definitely a lot more of a stylized look going on. Now we can go back to our red channel and we can push those reds in the highlights. Again, I'm going far and we can bring it back. And then I'm pushing the greens in the highlights as well. And that's to give me more of a warm look. Pay attention to these highlights up here. If I were to just do red, that's super unnatural. And as I pull the green up, you can see it warms it slightly more towards a yellow rather than a red. So this is before and this is after. We've gone pretty hard here, but this looks pretty good. Like, that's an interesting look. And you can further this by adding a whole bunch of contrast. I'm just going to pull down here just for now and lift my shadows slightly before and after. And obviously I haven't done that much, but if you look at everything that we've done in those two nodes, we went from this and now we've taken it to this. The image as a whole feels like there's a bit of a wash to it, and that's something that we want to really try and avoid. And so I'm going to show you what you can do. So I'm going to make two extra nodes here. The first node, I'm going to go to Curves, Loom versus Saturation right over here, and I'm going to click on the shadows or the black point over here, and now I'm just going to drag this down. So the more we disrupt this line, the more we saturate the tones within that luminance region or desaturate. And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to desaturate just in our shadows slightly, and watch the scopes over here as I pull this down. You can see that this red is kind of being lifted up slightly. Might be too subtle to see here. I'm going to pull down on my exposure. Next, you go to your next node, come to your primary log wheels, and then go to log. And here in your shadow, you just want to do a very, very subtle shadows balance. What's giving us this very interesting look in our shadows is there's sort of this gradual roll off going up from, our greens being higher than our reds, but our blues being higher than our greens. And so we want to sort of maintain that, but just balance it very slightly so that it feels like there's an anchor point. The image as a whole, or the look as a whole, will be more believable because there's something anchoring it to feeling more believable. Does that make sense? So let's give that a go. I'm going to pull down in the green slightly, something like this. And then I'm going to pull down in the blues, something like that. I don't want them to be perfectly leveled, but a little bit closer. So that's before and that's after. As you can tell, there's still a lot of creative juice happening here, but just through this one slight adjustment, very subtle, that wash seems to disappear, and all of a sudden there's a lot more depth in the image, especially here behind him. This is what our image looked like, and this is what it looks like now. You know how we said let's go far and we can bring it back? How we can do that is, if you like the tones in your image in the split tone that you've created, you can go to this tool over here, which is called our key, and come to key output. And now this is basically set to 100%. So 1 equals 100%. If I were to set this to 0.5, 50% of that adjustment would be applied to our image. So before and after. And now it's obviously a lot more subtle. And you can obviously play around with that to get it to where you want it to be. If you can imagine it, there are so many different ways that we could use this to get very unique and very different looks. So you can play with it as much as you want, find different complementary colors that you can push into the shadows and into the highlights, and start to achieve some very unique looks. Now we're going to go through the next one, which is using Primary's log wheels. These are incredible. I would definitely recommend using these if you want to have maybe a little bit more control than you do in your curves, although you need to be a lot more careful because in a curves there's a good roll off there, whereas with this you don't really have as much roll off, so you got to be a little bit more careful. We've got another node here, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a very similar kind of look. Typically I am cooling off the shadows and warming up the highlights, and sometimes I do different combinations to get what I'm looking for. So let's go in and subtract some red. So I'm going to pull some red, but I'm very sure that you're noticing over here it's just sort of getting clipped, and I don't really want to do that. So in my soft clip I'm going to unlink, choose red, and then I'm going to pull low soft up slightly like this. All that's really going to do is just compress the bottom end of my red channel slightly. You can see now my adjustment's not clipping straight away, and I've pushed that teal in the shadows a lot more than I did before. So let's pull down on our green again, somewhere there. Let's see that before and after, before and after. Again, this is quite a strong look, but you can see that we've actually protected our blacks quite well, and we can always pull this back later on. The cool thing about this is that we also have these ranges to play with. So if I pull the low range up, you can see that more of my image is being affected. I'm going to reset that range quickly. And as I reset that, you can notice that her face cleans up quite a lot. So we can also pull that all the way down, and now nothing in our image is being affected. So as I pull the range up, you'll actually see a line going through the scope, which is basically at which point all of that information is being processed through this split tone. So let me pull that up, and you can see all that information being affected. And I'm sure you're noticing that little line over there. So why would we use something like this? Well, if you felt like too much of this split tone is affecting too much of your image and it just doesn't feel right to you, you can adjust your low range to make sure that it's only really affecting the real bottom end. And then you can clean up the absolute blacks later to make it more believable, but it just helps you to be able to get a bit of a cleaner feel in your midtones. Like we were protecting our skin tones before, we can sort of protect our skin tones like this here as well. So the next thing that we could do is create a parallel node. So I've just got a shortcut there, but you can easily just go right click and say add node and then say parallel. Basically parallel nodes blend whatever adjustments you've done together very equally. So it looks really good. If you want to know more about nodes and the best nodes for color grading, in my opinion, for most of the things that we're going to do, check out this video here. It's really going to help. The reason I do this is because now I can see what I'm doing in my shadows in a node on its own, and then we're going to adjust the highlights in its own node as well. So we've introduced some cool teal look to our shadows. Let's go and introduce warmth to the highlights here. Nothing crazy. I'm going to pull down on my blue, which is introducing yellow, and then I'm going to pull down on my green, and now I'm getting more of like an orange feel going on here. I'm sure you're noticing, but this is clearly doing nothing to the image. So before and after. Our high range here is actually set to a little bit too high for our image. So as we pull that down, you'll notice that what we've done over here is now being introduced to our image. And we can obviously see it's very, very strong. So either what we could do is go and make this very warm, or we could come in and actually add teal to the highlights again. So pulling down in the highlights in the red channel, before and after, you can see that it actually does create quite an interesting look because we've got teals in the shadows. Now we've got teals in the highlight as well, but the whole image actually feels pretty good because there's warmth in the skin tones. We've looked after those skin tones and the image as a whole looks pretty nice. So split tone before and after, before and after. And you can see that it does add like a really nice creative element to the image. Let's see what happens if we were to make this warm. So I'm going to again pull down in my blues to introduce yellow, and then I'm going to pull down in the greens to introduce a little bit more magenta, so it's going to push the yellow towards orange. So that was before and that's after. It's nothing crazy, it's a little bit too red for me, so I'm going to introduce more green. And then what I'm going to do is pull down in my range, because this is a more subtle adjustment, so I'm going to pull down in my range so it affects more of the image, before and after, before and after. So that as a whole, before and after split tone. you can see that we've added a lot of shape to our image because we've got this nice teal in the shadows, whereas beforehand it just kind of felt flat. So this last method is split toning using a DCTL. Pixel Tools reached out to me and asked me to just check out one of their products, which is their split tone DCTL. Now it feels like something that I'm holding back from you if I don't share it. You know, it's such a valuable tool that I think it just makes sense to share with you. And so let me show you how to use it. Basically, go to the link in the description, download it, buy it, download it, and then you pull it into DaVinci Resolve like you would a LUT. Then you add a DCTL and then you go and select it. So now there's a lot going on, sure, but I'll walk you through it quite quickly. So we've obviously selected our DCTL, and now we've got these little red and green and blue icons, and then a whole bunch of the different tonal regions and sliders. And then you can actually go down all the way to the bottom, and now you can see you can adjust your pivot, you can blend, you can adjust your neutral pivot, you can clean your black points, which to me makes me very excited, and you can clean your whites, meaning that you can really just go in there and do what we were doing previously in 2 or 3 nodes. Now you can just do it here within one DCTL. And then you can bypass, you can actually show your curves, you can tell it your transfer function, so it then figures out what your middle gray point should be, so that pivot point, and where everything should be anchored from, and it sorts that out for you. You don't have to think about that. You basically just tell it what you're doing. As I pull down here, you can see what happens. And then as I clean the blacks, you can see what happens. Very exciting to me. Well-built tools like this makes me very excited. So first thing I'm going to do is clean my blacks all the way. And this is just something that I like to do right off the bat. And I'll show you why. So I have obviously pulled down and reduced the red in my shadows. And my clean blacks is all the way. Now what I'm going to do is pull this down until this line over here, this red line, comes towards this center point over here. What I'm basically trying to do is find the anchor point for my absolute blacks that I'm looking for, so that I'm actually cleaning those blacks nicely and giving myself a good space to roll off from. And then I'm going to show you what that looks like before and after. Before and after. So before and after. Very pretty looking image. The problem with it though, right now, is that most of my image is being affected by the split tone. So if you look at my scopes, I'm going to turn this off and turn it back on. Most of it is sitting within our shadows region. So all I'm going to do is just introduce a little bit more contrast into our image here. And that's mostly just for us to be able to get a good idea of what the split tone looks like. So now, before and after, you can still see that a lot of teal is being introduced into this image. So what you can do is come to your neutral pivot and start to play around with that. So this is basically neutralizing that pivot point right there. Let's zoom into a skin over here. If I bring that all the way down, you can see that that tone that we've added has done quite a lot to most of the image. And as I neutralize the pivot point, you can see that I clean up his skin tones just like that. This is obviously quite dangerous because if I don't do it enough, you can see how the image falls apart there. So I'm going to pull it up somewhere there. And then now you can see that the split tone is actually rolling off like this, neutralizing there. And then as we introduce into the highlights, it's going to do something similar. Before and after, before and after. And that's looking very nice. We can even go further here. Now, absolute highlights. Let's start to work up here. I'm going to introduce teal. And I'm going to go far and we can bring it back, right? Something like this. So before and after, before and after. Very strong on the teal in the highlights. So I'm going to do something like this. Then I'm going to show the curves and let's clean those whites. Something like that. So we got like a bit more of a gentle roll off there. So before and after, before and after. I mean, we've got a lot of contrast that we've added here by pulling up here. So I'm going to pull that down and reduce the contrast slightly. And then I'm going to pull back in the neutral pivot and show you what that would have looked like. And then pull it back up again and find a good balance here. This is something that I would just try to be careful with. But look at the results before and after, before and after. And I really, really like the feel that we have been able to get through this. It feels like there's so much more control, as well as so many more options for us because we've got low mid, high mid, and mids. Let me show you what this is going to look like on a clip like this. There's nothing crazy in the shot to make it look super stylized. Yes, it's shot with a decently nice camera, probably a decently nice lens, but where we can really get this image looking really good is if we shape it nicely with some good tones. So I'm going to pull down, again, introducing teal to the shadows. This time I'm not going to pull the green back. I'm going to leave it to be quite green. And then I'm going to introduce some red to the highlights and pull down in the blue in the highlights quite a bit. Something like this. Maybe I'll pull down slightly in the green, in the low, and then I'm going to clean those blacks somewhere around there. Full screen, before and after. I mean, just like that, I've been able to get a decent look going on. By the way, this is going through nothing other than 2 CSTs, input and an output. But through this, where we've been able to shape our tones in our image, we all of a sudden have a very creative look and a really nice feel to our image. The tones are actually looking really good. And that's through adding some complementary colors, 1 to the shadows, 2 to the highlights. And so now we have this very nice complementary look going on, and the tones in the image all being rendered through this, making it feel nice. So this is the way that you can use split toning in 3 different methods to be able to shape your image, shape the tones in your image, and be able to achieve some really nice looks. And again, add this underneath the looks that you're going to be using. So thanks for watching this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it and learned a lot from it. And if you did, don't be afraid to hit the like button, comment if you have any questions, and hit subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Go and check out FILMIC 3.0 because they are really cool looks and they have been downloaded over 1,000 times now, which is really exciting. And there's more to come in the future. So guys, I will see you in the next one.